big story on India since this week is the change in guard in the UK. Keir Starmer has stormed into 10 Downing Street by crushing records of getting the best election results for a party in almost 200 years. Labour is now indeed in a supermajority in UK Parliament with 411 seats in the 650 House. Tories are now down to their worst tally of 119. This victory has many ramifications for India. Starmer has emphasized that he's now heading a purged Labour Party, that he's removed some of the radical elements that were there in Labour Party, like Jeremy Corbyn, and he's now hoping and working towards a more centrist approach towards New Delhi. But let's stay with the India factor in these UK elections. Indians punch way above their weight in the UK. They are 3% of population, 6% contribution to the UK economy. And it is only fair that the Starmer government gives the community the political and economic influence that's commensurate with their contribution. But the catch is, South Asian diaspora vote is viewed as a monolithic vote bank by most parties, including Labour. But it is not, because it comprises of Indians, Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, and add to it the Khalistani elements that attacked the Indian High Commission in the past. So how will a centrist Labour 2.0 keep these fringe elements or different elements at bay? And how will this impact India-UK ties going forward, if at all it will? And will the view of some of the Labour Party MPs, 400 plus, have an overhang on UK's foreign policy? And will he view, or Starmer view, Indians as a separate vote bank independent of the other minority stakeholders that we just mentioned? And that's our big story tonight. In fact, we've got two big voices on the big story today. The first top voice on the show is Lord Joe Johnson, whom I spoke with earlier, on the size of the defeat that Tories have faced today. It's historic. And what are the implications of this huge defeat? Listen in. Thank you so much, Lord Johnson, for speaking to NDTV and NDTV World. What, according to you, were the main reasons for the defeat being the way it was? Much worse than what any would have imagined. What would you think the three factors were?
Well, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, former Prime Minister, I should now say, made the number one campaign promise to stop the boats. So he raised the salience of an issue to which he didn't have an answer. So in political terms, that was an appalling strategy, because he said repeatedly, we will stop the boats, we will stop the boats, we will stop the boats, and yet he didn't appear to have any real policy that would actually deliver on that commitment. And that became immediately apparent when the Rwanda policy, which he was pursuing, started to crumble within his fingers. So that's the first rule of politics. Don't raise the salience of an issue to which you don't have an answer. So he essentially tried to become Reform light, Reform being the party that has emerged under the leadership of Nigel Farage, that focuses almost exclusively on immigration issues and other related issues, cultural issues, and became a sort of a Reform light party. And that has spectacularly failed as a political gambit, underscoring that what really matters if you want to be a national party is that you sort of accept the way the world is, rather than want to endlessly hark back to how it was in the 1950s, when Britain was a very different kind of country.
What does Starmer's entry mean for India? What should we brace ourselves for, or what is it that we should now be pleasantly surprised and await in terms of Starmer's view, policy and direction for India?
Well, we need to wait for Keir Starmer to form his government and to choose the foreign policy team. Obviously, we have a shadow foreign secretary at the moment in the form of David Lammy, who's extremely experienced and has been making a lot of effort in the India relationship. You'll have noticed that the Labour Party manifesto did not sort of revisit many of the old themes that previous Labour governments have emphasised in their relations with India, including, for example, the issue of Kashmir and so on. Keir Starmer, in his campaign, has made a concerted effort to reach out to the Hindu vote in the UK, visiting the Swami Narayan temple in Kingsbury, and promising to protect the interest of British Hindus during his campaign. So he is making an effort on that score. At the same time, he can't ignore other minorities in the UK, including the Pakistani and other Muslim diasporas in the UK, who represent, 1.2 million voters. And it's worth noting that several independent members of Parliament close to those communities have successfully defeated Labour candidates overnight and are now represented in the UK Parliament. So he can't be ignoring those issues.
You're right about that, and Jeremy Corbyn being one of them. He is one on an independent plank, and he is now, yes, you're right, that he's been a strong votary of some of those constituencies and some of those thoughts that India and the Hindu community have been very vociferously opposed to.
Yeah, and I think it's crucial to understand that those MPs, and indeed Labour MPs who represent large Muslim communities in their constituencies, will feel that it's entirely appropriate for them to be vocal advocates of those communities and their interests in Parliament. And India should not confuse their doing that with positions of the government itself. It's a key part of our democracy that MPs represent their constituents of all shapes and sizes and do so entirely freely. And this doesn't mean that this is a UK government position, but simply MPs representing their interests in Parliament in a free democracy. And that's a really important part of our system. And it's often a source of misunderstanding between the UK and India. But it's vital that everyone understands that this is MPs doing their job, representing their constituents, rather than necessarily being government policy.
But I want to ask you this, that will that have an overhang on Starmer's economic and foreign policies towards India? Do you see that having an overhang?
No, I mean, the UK and India have been pursuing a trade agreement over the past 3 or 4 years. This, has been making steady progress, and I imagine that, a re-elected Prime Minister Modi in India, the new Prime Minister Keir Starmer in the UK, will at the right moment for both countries resume those conversations. There is a deal. It's not a massively beneficial deal in terms of what it does for the UK economy, but there is a trade deal to be done at some point, and I'm sure those conversations will resume when it's mutually convenient for both sides.
All right, Lord Johnson, thank you so much for speaking to NDTV, and let's wait for the next steps that the Tories will take from here on after these sombering numbers. Thank you so much, sir. As Tories do some introspection and Labour gets on with the business of running the government, let's take you through the India Ascends action plan that has been prepared for Starmer's government, which includes easier visa norms, clearer paths to immigration, closer strategic and military ties, and lastly, and most importantly, a free trade pact between India and UK that has been in the works for a very long time and hopefully will be signed soon. And let's get in another top voice on the show. And that is Lord Karan Bilimoria, who's independent crossbench peer of the House of Lords. Lord Bilimoria, thanks much for speaking to NDTV. My first question, sir, is Starmer has said that he wants a new strategic partnership with India. What do you think will be the key hallmarks of this? So will it be about visa restrictions being eased? Could that be expected?
This is a historic day today in the UK, when Keir Starmer has won this phenomenal supermajority. Tony Blair was the last to win in this sort of way.
But he's better Tony Blair as well.
Well, this is great news. This is great news for many reasons. One, the last government, led by the last leader, Rishi Sunak, has been very, very damaging to the United Kingdom, and it all goes back to Brexit. It started in 2016, June, 8 years ago, and since then we've had turmoil politically, we've had zero or declining growth and productivity. Our economy has suffered, our inward investment We were number 2 in the world for attracting inward investment. That is now much worse. So we need stability desperately. 5 prime ministers in the last 8 years. That's how bad things have been. So to have somebody coming in like Keir Starmer, assisted by his finance minister, his chancellor-to-be, Rachel Reeves, saying they're going to bring stability. And he has also emphasized time and again, not just his slogan for change, but he's changed his own party. People forget the reason why Boris Johnson, you just had my friend, Lord Joe Johnson, Boris Johnson's brother, on just now. The reason why Boris Johnson won that 80-seat majority was because the public didn't want Jeremy Corbyn.
Yes.
Because Jeremy Corbyn is an extreme left-wing radical leader that the public was scared of. They did not want him to lead the country. We don't have that. Keir Starmer of the last 5 years has changed his party to be far more towards the centre.
In fact, that is what I was going to ask you, Lord Bilimoria, that this is Labour 2.0. It's supposed to be centrist. And how do British Indians perceive Keir Starmer? And how do they perceive the new Labour Party now?
Exactly. And all they've got to do is look back to Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. When you look back to that time, those 13 years, we had 18 years of Margaret Thatcher and John Major Conservative. Then we had 13 years of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, and now 14 years of Conservative. Those 13 years of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown were, from a business point of view, the best I've had in my 3 decades in business. Low rates of tax, capital gains tax topped at 18%, top rate of income tax at 40% for the vast majority of that time. It was wonderful. They were business friendly. Towards India, it was a joy. I accompanied Tony Blair on a huge delegation in 2005 to India. Then again, Gordon Brown. Our relationship with India was fantastic. We launched the UK-India Business Council, of which I'm the founding chair, in that period of a Labour government.
You're speaking about business, sir. You're speaking about business. I want to ask you, how soon do you expect the FTA finally coming through? It's been in the works for a very long time.
Well, I'm the first person, not just of Indian origin, but the first ethnic minority in this country to have been appointed the president of the Confederation of British Industry, the CBI. And it was during my tenure in January 2022 that we launched the FTA negotiations. 2.5 years later, we still have not completed that FTA. We've gone around 14 rounds of negotiation.
Yes.
The Indian elections are over on the 4th of June. UK elections are over on the 4th of July.
Yes.
Now's the time to conclude this FTA. And by the way, it's a huge disappointment that we had an Indian origin prime minister for almost 2 years.
And we couldn't get that through.
He did not take a delegation. He did not take
Lord
a delegation
Bilimoria, very
to
quickly,
India.
sir, any surprises that we need to brace ourselves for under the new Labour government? Very quickly.
They are saying there will be no surprises. They are saying they're looking at a 15-year runway of putting in place the reforms and the stability and the growth that will lead to the jobs, that will lead to the taxes, that will pay for the public services, and the growth that this economy desperately needs. So we're crying out for that. And India needs to be a #1 priority. And they've said it at the India Global Forum just a few days ago. David Lammy, possibly the Foreign Secretary, said India's #1 priority. So we know that.
All right, Lord Bilimoria, thanks much for speaking to me and putting that in perspective, that there are no surprises likely. And if at all, there'll only be pleasant surprises under Keir Starmer's government, and India-UK ties could soar high, possibly include more of defence and strategic partnerships as well going forward. Thanks much, Lord Bilimoria, for speaking.
Pleasure.
All right, on that note, we slip into a very short break. We come back with lots more on the other side. Stay with us.